What's up, True Crime World? You're here with Illuminal on the Wall. I'm Bevy.
And I'm Becky. And today's case is about detectives who suffer from severe tunnel vision, who leave a family waiting for 23 years with no justice. This is the case of Sherri Rasmussen. Listeners' discretion is advised.
Hello to all of our LOTW friends. And hey, Becky.
Hey, Bev and friends.
So, we have to tell you guys, because we were just hanging out with my dad and his girlfriend, Joanne. And I think a couple episodes back, we had told y'all about a prank that we pulled on my dad. And we had put little wooden bees all over his house. And they have found the majority of them. Actually, I know the count. It's 63 to be exact, while there was 80 there. And we were kind of laughing about some of the ways that they're still finding them. And I was like, oh, Joanne, I have the video of me, Becky, and Kristen putting them all over your house. And like the first two that are in the video are one in a butter container. And then the next one is like on the stove.
Under the stove cover.
Yeah, like on the burner cover. If you lift it up, we put one in there. And she sees it and she goes, You guys put one there? And she's like, oh my gosh, literally like a couple days ago, I was cooking on that burner and I was like, what is that smell? And your dad was like, something smells like it's burning in here. And we're like, you didn't see the bee? And she said she didn't see it. So she ended up just cooking a little wooden bee and didn't even realize what it was until we showed her the video.
Oh my God, I almost died laughing when that happened.
I know. I was like, how did you not see that? I think we even had a discussion like when we were placing them. We were like,
what if they don't see it here? What if it lights on fire?
And I was like, no, she'll for sure see this. They will for sure see it.
But nope.
Turns out she didn't.
Wrong. Almost lit it on fire.
So just kind of funny.
The real question is, she never noticed the bee and until she saw our video, had no idea what that burning smell was. But my question is, where is the bee now?
Where is the bee? Is it like half melted or burnt like underneath
on the bottom of
burner?
The frying pan or the burner?
Exactly. It's like, where is it?
We're going to have to ask about that.
Yeah,
we're probably going home to check.
Yeah. So anyways, we are now going to post the video this week. So stay tuned for that because, you know, the cat's out of the bag. So now we can share it with you guys.
Yeah. No surprises spoiled here.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, Bev.
Yes.
We have a killer story today. It is very interesting, and let's get into it.
All right, let's go.
So today's case is about a woman named Sherri Rasmussen. Now, she was born February 7th, 1957 in Washington. Her parents had a total of 3 girls, and when they were younger, the Rasmussen family moved to Tucson, Arizona. Sherri was an absolutely great student, and she was able to complete elementary school 1 year early. She had somehow managed to do the whole 7th year over the summer with no assistance from her parents, which I don't know what grade 7-year-old would do that really well.
Grade 7-year-old. But yeah.
That is some dedication.
Well, it's when I went into grade 7, it was like a whole new world. You know, things were different. The expectations were a little higher.
Yeah, we had lockers.
Yeah, we had lockers.
My God.
Exactly. And so it is kind of shocking that she didn't really have much assistance from her parents and was able to do that. So clearly she's smart.
Yeah, and one determined little girl. So jumping a bit forward, Bev, into 1973, Sherri graduated high school. She decided to attend college right away in California. She chose there because her older sister was also attending that college. While there, she decided to take nursing. And after graduating in 1975, she took her master's at the University of California. While taking her master's, she decided to work as a nurse to pay for her education.
Which, like, kudos to her. That is hard. I remember being in school in general, like, working was not an option.
You could not have handled a job.
I was depleted. Day after day.
Year after year.
Minute by minute. I was being depleted.
My soul left my body.
And I was left as a shell,
Of who you were.
wallowing in my misery,
A corpse.
just
Laying
existing. Oh, God. But yeah, school was hard, and it is hard. So
It's a lot
anyone
of work.
who works while taking education,
Bless you.
seriously, props.
Yes. And fortunately, that all paid off for her, Bev, because at the ripe old age of 23, Sherri graduated with her master's and began working at the local hospital.
At the age of 23 with your master's?
Yeah.
Dang. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
good for her.
Yeah. And even though she was young, she headed the nursing department for severely ill people. So not only was she a nurse, but she was like heading the department.
Yeah, she was heading the department. I don't know why that
That's how
sounds naughty.
Well, that's how
But
she got the
was
job.
The head of the department. I get it. The head of the severely ill department.
Yes.
But yeah, she was heading the department. Now, listen.
Managing nurse, if you will, Bev.
Yes. Okay. That. Jeez. I can't help it. But here, this is something that's kind of funny in a weird, like, you know how when you say something and it sounds funny? Craig was like talking about how he had gone out for like, he was talking about when they do events at his work or whatever, they don't necessarily want to buy like people attending the event a lot of food because he's like, and he said this, no word of a lie. He said, we just don't want them to pork themselves. You know, like
What?
pig out, like pork themselves.
That's how he phrased it.
Yeah, we just don't want them to pork themselves. And I was like, wait a tick. Did you just say pork themselves? Like, what is this? He's like, yeah, like overeat. I'm like, I have never heard that in my life.
Nor
but I was
have
like, I'm going to use it. I'm going to
I
use
like it. It's
Oh,
like a term, be like, yeah, you're
I
right.
don't need seconds. I just don't want to pork myself tonight.
That's a great phrase because it's like, I do want it and it was awesome to eat, but I'm going to stop because
Yeah.
I don't want to pork myself.
Yeah, it's epic. And
Did he like make that phrase all on his own, or is that a thing that people say?
He said it so casually, like it was just something
People say.
people say, and that's why I was like, what is
What am I
going
missing?
on? Yeah, I was like, when have I, like, I've never heard that term before. So if you guys have, hello to all you freaking weirdos, because like, what the F? But I will say it is like a cool little phrase.
That you shall be using from here on out.
Yes, yes.
Fabulous. Fabulous, Bev.
So anyways, moving on.
Moving on. So, as we said, Sherri was quite accomplished, and her parents were so proud of her for graduating and just working through that all. They were so proud, in fact, that they bought her an apartment in LA.
Wow.
But
Generous.
very generous. But being a very mature woman that she obviously is, she didn't want her parents to pay for her. So every month when the mortgage would come out, she would send her mom and dad money.
For the mortgage.
Yeah.
So she was paying them back.
Yeah, she was.
Wow, what an honorable lady.
Seriously.
Sherri, I like ya.
Now, in May 1984, Sherri had been working for a bunch of years and she was single. But when she turned 27, she met a man named John Rudin. They immediately hit it off and began dating. John had a good job as a computer engineer. And within a year, the couple had decided to get married. And John moved into Sherri's apartment. Now, jumping ahead to February 24th, 1986, Sherri and John were only married for a couple months when one morning, she just so casually told John while he was getting ready for work that she wasn't feeling all that well, and she decided that she would stay home from work. Sherri had asked her husband to call her in a few hours just to check in on her. Shortly after that, John left for work around 7:20 a.m., and like he promised, he called Sherri at 10 a.m. But there wasn't an answer. He called again a half an hour later around 10:30 and still no answer. He thought maybe his wife had changed her mind and went to work anyways. Maybe she was feeling a bit better. So he called the hospital to check, but she had not gone in to work that day. John got his sister-in-law to call Sherri just to see if she could get through. But unfortunately, she couldn't either. Sherri was not answering her phone. However, John and his sister-in-law just thought, she's not feeling well, maybe she's sleeping, didn't hear the phone ring, and she'll feel better tonight. So they left it, and they went on with their day.
Yeah, I would assume she was sleeping it off as well and just trying to get rid of whatever bug she had.
Exactly. That's a normal thing people do.
Yeah.
Later that day, when John returned home around 6 p.m., he noticed that their garage door was open. This was unusual, and he also noticed that Sherri's brand new BMW was missing. As he approached the garage, John noticed a bunch of broken glass on the ground. He could see it was from the balcony door that sat right above the garage. It had been smashed. So that's obviously a little concerning.
Yeah, of course.
And at that point, he decides to very timidly enter the house through the garage and immediately found his wife laying on the floor.
Oh, no.
There was blood all over, and Sherri was in rough shape. So he called the police. When homicide detectives got there, they see this lifeless body of Sherri's, and they noticed every room in the house was in complete disarray and had been ransacked. A bunch of the furniture had been flipped over, items strewn all over, vases and breakables were smashed, and they could only assume that something really violent has gone on here. And upon looking around the house, they actually found a bloody handprint on the wall right beside the alarm. They assumed it was because Sherri was attempting to set it off to alert someone that she was in danger.
That is a very viable theory. And it's also very tragic. It's like it's her last-ditch effort to fight for her life and save herself, right?
Exactly.
So devastating. Especially now that we know she is in fact dead, right?
Mm-hmm. To have something like so close to saving herself and then have it just be so far away.
Just out of her grasp.
No good. Now, when they started looking at Sherri's body, Bev, they noticed that Sherri has severe bruises and wounds all over her body and had one distinct bite mark on one of her wrists. They also see restraint marks on Sherri's wrists and concluded that she was tied up at one point. However, the attacker must have untied her before they left because they weren't on her when they found her.
The restraints,
Yes.
right. Seems like a very violent attack.
It does seem like a violent attack.
Especially with all the broken glass and everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What they were able to determine at the crime scene, they didn't even have to wait for the autopsy for this one, was that she was shot 3 different times close range with what seemed to be was a .38 caliber revolver. The investigators had also found a blanket in the house with 3 bullet holes in it. They assumed this was used in an attempt to silence the gun.
So some of the things that I'm picking up on, and I'm sure that the detectives are picking up on, is that whoever did this did have some knowledge about guns in general. At least that's what I would assume. Because I don't think that people, just the ordinary random person that shot a gun, would try and silence it. So to me, it just seems that somebody has a little bit more information in that department than the average Joe.
Yeah, I can see how you would think that because who would think to use a blanket, an everyday household item, to silence a gun?
Yeah.
I would, not knowing much about guns myself,
Right.
I would never
Think to do that.
think to use a blanket
No,
to
me either.
silence a gun. I
Me
would just
either.
assume that gun's going to be loud regardless.
Yeah, and then hightail it the hell out of wherever you're shooting it, right?
Yeah. And if I wanted it to be quiet, I probably would have found a way to buy a silencer.
Yeah, not just use a random household item. It just shows more intimate knowledge of, I don't know, the workings of guns,
Yeah.
I would say. And just like knowledge of how to silence things. Like, I don't know, it just shows that someone has experience in that department. And it's a little bit, I don't know, that's just catching my attention at this point.
Yeah, I agree. It's not common knowledge. I don't
Exactly.
think. Now, within the house, the detectives could tell that there was a long struggle. There was a pathway of blood and, as we've said, destruction throughout the apartment, and they believed that that told a tale in its own. However, detectives came to the conclusion that this must have been a failed burglary that turned fatal.
Interesting. I'm sure you're going to get into why they had made that assumption, but to me that seems a little bit odd given the information you've provided me up until this point. So they must have something else pointing them towards that conclusion, yeah?
Yeah, they do. They believe that the intruders were caught in the middle of their burglary, and that's
By Sherri, right?
by Sherri, and that's when the struggle started. What made them think that this was a burglary was that the stereo equipment was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, making it look like they were caught in the act. As we know, Sherri's BMW was also missing from the garage, so detectives thought it was used to flee the scene and was an improvised act
Right.
of theft.
That I can see now the reasoning behind that assumption.
Yeah. Now, detectives somehow also came to the conclusion that this was the work of 2 people. I, to be honest, have no idea why they thought it was 2 people. I didn't really find an explanation. Like, was it because the crime scene was so brutal? It must have been 2 people. I don't know.
Right.
There wasn't like 2 different sets of fingerprints. There was nothing to actually provide a reason for that theory, but they had it.
Right. Okay. So it's just kind of like an assumption on their part with no backing.
Exactly. Now, it was noted that there were several items worth money in the house right out in the open that had not been touched. And this left everyone really scratching their heads because, like, why would you burglarize a home
And not take the valuables?
and not take the valuables? You're right. And even just taking the stereo, they had higher value items in the home. So why was that the thing you want to take?
Yeah. And I think from a lot of the other episodes on LOTW that we have done, oftentimes when the house is ransacked and valuables are left in the home, burglary is often ruled out.
Yes.
For that very reason. Like, this is not the motive. But I'm sure it leaves them scratching their heads because they're like, well, we think it is a burglary. We have reasons backing that. But then nothing was actually like taken of value. So now they have 2 conflicting ideas.
Yeah, isn't that the truth, Bev, honestly. And in this case, what kind of gave them that impression as well is the fact that there was no forced entry into this home. So this means that Sherri would have had to have let someone in or they needed a key.
So now we have a couple pieces of evidence that point towards a motive of burglary and 2 more pieces of evidence that kind of
Suggest not burglary.
suggest otherwise. Exactly. So that's confusing in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting, just to add a little air of confusion to all of this, is when detectives speak with neighbors, they had gotten in touch with a cleaning lady who heard a commotion that morning and thought it was a domestic dispute. She did not think to call the cops and just let it be, but she heard no gunshots.
Although there seems to be a reasonable explanation as to why, solely because of the silencer type blanket thing.
Exactly. And no one saw anyone breaking in or going into Sherri's home. Not that that says no one did.
Right.
No one saw it. So they're still no further ahead. So they obviously go and take blood samples. They take nail clippings, fingerprints from the home. And they also thought to use a cotton swab to collect saliva from that prominent bite mark on Sherri's wrist. Although at that time they didn't really have any DNA, they thought it could be useful down the road. And after a thorough search of the house, it was determined that the only things taken from the apartment was Sherri's car and Sherri and John's wedding certificate. Like, what?
What the heck?
Who takes a wedding certificate, Bev?
Yeah, of all things
All
have
things.
taken, right?
Especially
Leave
out of all
valuables.
legal documents.
Yeah, and take the wedding certificate.
Like, okay.
I don't know about you, but to me, taking a piece of evidence like that seems to speak more to the person's motive more than anything else I've heard. Because it's such a random thing to take, right? It's like, is it this, like, are you doing this out of spite for someone's marriage or something? Like, I don't know, but it's just like, I would never expect my wedding certificate to be the one thing that was taken from my home.
God,
if
no.
someone broke in. That's weird.
No. Especially like you said, broke in. Like 2 random people broke into your house and just thought, we need to take your marriage certificate and kill you.
No, it seems like there's a more intimate relationship at play in this whole investigation. No? It's like, almost seems like whoever took that has a relationship with either Sherri or John.
Exactly. Not a stranger.
Yeah.
And just like we're confused, this left everyone involved in the investigation confused as well. What is the point of that?
Mm-hmm.
But it did make the detectives wonder, did John do this? Or was he involved? Was the stolen marriage certificate a symbol?
All valid questions, I would have to say.
Definitely. So because of this, the investigators, they're looking into John. But his alibi was strong. He was at work all day. People had seen him around, and they had the calls to Sherri from his work at the time he said he had made them. So at that moment, they were able to rule out John as their suspect. Now, let's jump forward to a little over a week after Sherri had been murdered. They found her car in a parking lot 4 kilometers from her apartment. It was unlocked, and the keys were inside. Unfortunately, there was 0 evidence in the vehicle to suggest who could have taken it.
I do have to say, to me, everything that you have said so far doesn't really point towards a burglary because one of the reasons that you had mentioned that the detectives thought it was a burglary was that the BMW was taken, right? Like it was the getaway car.
Yeah, it would have been the huge money maker.
Exactly. Like why wouldn't they have taken it and sold it to somebody, right? But just to leave it in a parking lot,
Abandon
4
it.
kilometers away. I don't know. To me, that kind of is like all this evidence is disproving the burglary theory even more in my eyes. And not only that, but then they investigated John and found that he had a rock solid alibi. And so their only theory for explaining why the marriage certificate was taken falls flat as well.
Yeah.
So now they can't even explain why a marriage certificate of all things was taken.
No, they can't.
So to me, it's just like, I don't know. Burglary.
They're on something if that's
just, like,
the theory
seems
they're
off the
going
table,
with.
Yeah.
I know. It seems like they're kind of just created this, like fabricated this theory and they're like, yep, gonna stick with it.
Yeah, no matter what the evidence says.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bev, in kind of a funny turn, not like actually funny, but funny just because of the timing. 2 months after Sherri's death, there was a robbery just a few hundred meters away from John and Sherri's home. The similarities between this robbery and Sherri's death were incredible. 2 men had broken into this new residence through the garage, and they had threatened the occupants with a gun and stolen the stereo equipment.
Ooh.
So you can imagine how detectives are sitting there and be like, God damn it. That sounds so similar to our fabricated theory.
Yeah, it's like confirmation bias at its best, right?
Exactly.
Because even though there are some similarities, it's also quite different because they didn't kill anyone and they actually stole something of value.
Exactly.
So it's oddly and eerily similar.
And yet one major difference.
Yeah.
No
or
doubt.
a couple. Like
what I find really interesting is in this burglary, they do threaten the occupants of that home. So if I were the detectives, I would be thinking though, maybe they just didn't put up a fight and Sherri did. So I could see how this is, like you said, confirming, right?
Yeah, confirmation bias. Yeah, totally. I can see that as well.
Now, with the help of the 2 burglary victims, they were able to assist cops in creating a composite drawing of the 2 men. And from their description, detectives learned that both the men were of Latino descent. Unfortunately, these men were never found. But like we said, this incident solidified detectives' theory in the case of Sherri that there was a 2-man burglary gone wrong.
Right. It even confirms that 2-person theory. Dang.
Yes, I know. Like, what are the chances that would have happened, right?
No kidding.
And unfortunately, because of all these similarities, this really solidified that bias that you were talking about earlier. And they continued on with this investigation with such tunnel vision that it's almost like they were unable to see that there could have been other suspects.
Or another motive at all.
Exactly. And what's really sad about this tunnel vision is that Sherri's parents were watching this happen. And they pled with detectives to search other avenues. But when they were met with such pushback from the detectives, they became so frustrated.
No doubt. I mean, you reading it, even I feel frustrated because there are so many instances where the motive for burglary just doesn't fit. And so it just seems outrageous to not look at any other avenues for this crime.
Exactly. And what's worse is that Sherri's father specifically had asked detectives to look at one of John's ex-girlfriends. Her name was Stephanie Lazarus, and she was undeniably obsessed with John.
Ooh.
Now, what made it tricky was Stephanie was a police officer, and when her name was brought up, detectives virtually laughed this off and told Sherri's father to kind of take a hike in a really polite way, but they did.
Yeah, they're like, you're crazy for this accusation.
Exactly. And Mr. Rasmussen felt that it was because she was a cop that they thought, not one of her own, there's no way she could have done this.
Yeah, they wouldn't even entertain that idea because of it.
Exactly, which is bullshit.
It is bullshit because when we discuss motives for crimes, Becky, oftentimes jealousy is a huge motive for crime. So to just laugh it off is wild.
It's poor detectiving.
Like if someone's dad comes to you and says, hey, I know that my daughter's husband had a crazy ex who was obsessed with him. Like, why wouldn't you look into that? If her father knew about this girl, like obviously it was a pervasive enough situation in Sherri's life that her father knew about it. So, like, why not look into it? Cover your bases, right?
Yeah, just in case. Now, some of the reasons why Sherri's family was thinking it was Stephanie was because they had all heard that Stephanie was really struggling with the progression of Sherri and John's relationship, and she had started harassing Sherri. In one instance, she had showed up at Sherri's job and was telling her that her and John's relationship was doomed and that Stephanie and John would be together once again.
Wow.
Stephanie then proceeded to tell Sherri that John had slept with her after they became engaged. This obviously upset Sherri so much. She had gone home and told John what had happened with Stephanie. He admitted to sleeping with Stephanie. He told Sherri that when Stephanie found out about their engagement, she begged him to come over. When he did, she pleaded for him to come back to her. John told her no, that he still loved his fiancée, Sherri. At that point, Stephanie was being completely relentless, and she had offered to sleep with John one last time. And so, unfortunately, he kind of crumbled at her advances, and they had sex.
Wow. That makes me very sad for Sherri.
Totally.
She doesn't deserve that.
Yeah, it honestly did not sound like it took all that much convincing.
No kidding. I mean, listen, cutting ties with your exes can be difficult.
Yep.
But sleeping with them after they're clearly begging for you to come back to them.
And becoming a little obsessive.
Like, gives
harassing your new fiancé.
Mixed emotions, right? Like, it gives mixed intentions to Stephanie. So, like, yeah. John.
Shame on you.
Shame on you, buddy.
You perpetuated this weird obsession.
Yes, he did.
So, obviously, John apologized to Sherri and told her he felt like shit. Sherri ended up forgiving him, and they decided to move forward with their relationship. Unfortunately, that final night of passion grew a deeper longing and desire in Stephanie for John. She would not let him go, and in turn continued to cause more issues for Sherri.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Like, we just said it.
Yeah, it perpetuated it.
Stephanie, keeping those soul ties with sex, you know? What are you doing?
And over the next couple months, Stephanie showed up over and over again at the couple's house for reasons as silly as John apparently promised to wax Stephanie's skis. Now, that does sound like a sexual innuendo, I'm just saying.
Wax my skis.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
But it was real. Like,
did he actually promise to wax her skis?
I don't know if he promised, but she was insisting he did. And
just like an excuse to show up at the house.
Yeah, like something silly like, oh, I left my skis here. You know, something silly.
Yeah, I forgot my Tupperware at your house. I need to come pick it up, okay?
Hi, John.
I need to come to your house. My Tupperware is there.
Oh my God.
My skis, they need to be waxed.
Oh, did I forget my lip chap on your doorstep? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's invasive though, right? Like, that's invasive to show up at someone's door.
Yeah, it is.
I don't like that.
Me either. And you know what? He did wax her skis though.
What?
I would have been like, GTFO, biatch.
Yeah, I would
get away from my house.
Out.
You're causing me problems.
Oh my gosh, that makes me like really mad. Now, I'm not like one of those crazy girls. At least I like to think I'm not. But if one of Craig's like ex-girlfriends just showed up at our house with skis and she was already being obsessive and weird, and I found out that like Craig had cheated on me with her, I would freaking snap those skis in half, man. I would get superhuman strength over my knee and be like, "What? You think you can have my husband wax your skis? Get stuffed!" Like, I'd go freaking ape, bro.
You know, I can picture that.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I would probably have some choice words for sure.
I bet you, though, if I did try and, like, bounce a ski off my knee, it would just hurt me. They probably wouldn't break.
You know, all I'm picturing is when you're trying to break these skis in my mind, yeah. I picture, you know that scene from Bridesmaids when she's trying to break that giant cookie?
Oh, yeah.
And she like shoves the knife and she's like, ah! And does like absolutely no damage. And then the cookie like falls on her and she's like, ah! I'm virtually
defeated by the cookie.
Yeah, I feel like you will be defeated by the skis.
I believe it. That's funny. That's good.
Yes.
But still, I would be like, pound sand.
pound sand.
Yeah, and if Craig waxed her skis, I'd be like, get out. No, I'm just kidding. But I would be like questioning stuff. I'd be like, this is ridiculous. Like
Rip the wax
you're
out of his
feeling the
hands.
fire, man.
Yeah.
He's feeling that fire.
Like, why are you doing nice things for her?
Yeah, exactly.
You say, I'm sorry, I was an a-hole and led you on, but this
Cut
no
ties.
longer is going to happen. I will not wax your skis. Take him to a shop.
Take them to a shop like a normal person.
Yes.
That's redonkulous.
Well, Bev, it didn't stop there, and it actually got a little more scary. Another time, Sherri was home all by herself, and literally out of the blue, Stephanie was standing in her living room.
Holy shit.
And Stephanie said that she needed to talk to John, but John was not home.
That is scary AF.
Exactly. And it took a bit of convincing from Sherri to actually get her to leave.
Huh. That is terrifying. Because one, she is a cop, and two, how the hell did she get in her home? If I came home to a woman or a person, anyone standing by my home, like, I'd be shitting myself, Becky.
I would too. It'd be so scary. Now, just like we think it's scary, Sherri thought it was scary too. And as we said, how did she get in her home? Like, she didn't feel safe now in her home. And what was very concerning is not only did she get in her home, but the complex they lived in was surrounded by a very large wall, kind of fence thing. But it was so huge that someone probably couldn't climb over it.
Right.
And to get into the complex, there was a passcode that was needed. So how the F did she get into the complex and then into her house?
Yeah,
There's
is
multiple
terrifying.
concerning questions there. At that point, Sherri really thought about going to the police, but because as we know, Stephanie was a police officer, Sherri felt that there was nothing that was going to happen if she went to the police, that she might even be like laughed at a bit, and this case would be overlooked.
Because of Stephanie being a police officer. And I think she was right to assume that, considering when her dad went to the cops about Stephanie, they laughed her off, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see why. And it also makes me really sad to think like Stephanie was exerting power over Sherri, being like, what are you going to do about it? Like, I'm a cop. Like,
Nothing.
what, you're going to tell your
gonna tell
sad
on
story
me?
to me?
Oh.
Like, you're going to come to me?
Sure,
You're
I'll
going
write
to
your
report it to
report.
me? Oh. Yeah, like, it's like bullshit.
It is. Could you imagine how helpless you would feel, though, in that scenario? Because you're like, you're scaring me, lady, and you're the police, and I can't report it to anyone.
Yeah, and like, she's supposed to be the person that Sherri can go to get help.
Mm-hmm.
But she's being victimized by her.
Exactly.
Terrible.
And so, Bev, with a little digging, Sherri and John learned that Stephanie took advantage of her authority, being a police officer, as we said, and used her badge to persuade the security guard of the complex to let her in.
Dang.
That's how she got in.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
I mean, you know, you think police officers shows you the badge and like, let me in, and be like, yes, officer.
Of course.
For sure. I'm not even going to question you. And that's what's really sad, because it was easy. And what was even more concerning, when Stephanie had just showed up in their apartment, there was no sign of forced entry.
Whoa.
So tell me, Bev, how the bleep did she get in there?
Right. Did she have like a key?
She seems kind of sneaky.
Yeah. Like, what happened? Did she steal a key from John, like make a spare set?
Yeah. Did she pick a lock?
Yeah. Like, what the heck? God.
So obviously they're feeling like their space is being completely invaded by this horrible woman who's just creating a lot of fear. And I'm sure she doesn't even see it that way. She's so freaking in her own mind of like her obsession. Maybe she is totally aware of what she's doing. And if she is, shame on her.
I feel like she's aware. How can you not be aware of how scary you are when you're entering someone's home without consent? That's freaking weird.
Yeah, it is. Now, going back to the investigation, detectives do learn that before Sherri was murdered, she had a feeling that she was being followed, so a little stalked throughout her day-to-day life. Some of the reasons that she felt that way was she had been out for dinner one night, and she saw a man looking at her while they were eating. When she looked up and looked at him, he immediately turned and left. She never actually saw a face because a hood was blocking said person, so she doesn't even actually know if it was a man or woman.
Right. She just knows that as soon as she looked at this person, they immediately left, which, I mean, that's unnerving.
Yeah, and she got a really creepy feeling. And as we've said before, trust your gut. she was also receiving regular phone calls. And when she would answer, the person on the other line would just hang up. We've seen this before. It is complete torment for the person receiving those calls. It's just like taunting them.
Right,
making them feel uncomfortable at home.
Yeah.
It's not fair. Now, despite not actually knowing who it was, Sherri suspected it was all Stephanie and had made it very clear to her family that that is what she thought. Now, despite detectives hearing all this information, which to me it would be like red flag, look at Stephanie, it all seemed to fall on deaf ears. The detectives still felt confident that it was the same two Hispanic individuals that had done the robbery so close by. Like, I don't understand. Like, how many things can you be like just given on a silver platter?
And just ignore.
Yeah. So 3 months after the murder, some of the documents relating to Sherri's murder were, I'm doing air quotes, lost, and they were missing from the station. All the journals detectives had made with updates in the case, leads, just disappeared out of thin air. The question is, had they gone missing because Stephanie did something to them? Or were the other detectives covering for Stephanie?
Or was it just like a
Whoopsie.
Like, what if it just happened to, like, I don't know, bad filing or something and it's just gone? I don't know.
People make mistakes.
But it's just very convenient for Stephanie, who is at least being identified as a potential suspect in this case, and then to have all of the files go missing when we know that she is a detective or a police officer. It's way too suspicious to not be
seen as shady.
Yeah, it seems more than a coincidence.
That it does, Bev. Now, at this point, the case went cold. They could not identify these two Hispanic burglarized men. And Sherri's family felt that detectives were uninterested in looking at alternative suspects or leads.
Because they were.
But Sherri's family did their best at being persistent with detectives, but it didn't seem to motivate them one iota. And 8 months after Sherri's death, her family issued a $10,000 reward for any information that would help identify her killer. Now, Sherri's family is kind of hidden roadblock after roadblock because that reward did not uncover any new leads. And again, the case went cold, despite holding a press conference the following year with the same reward. Over the next 7 years, Sherri's family is fighting to find her killer. They do not give up hope, and they're persistent. And when the lead detective on the case retires, Sherri's father is super excited to meet with the new detectives and get his daughter's case reopened, reevaluated, and hopefully catch that killer. Sherri's father even offered at that point to pay out of pocket for DNA analysis because by this time, it's 1993 and DNA was being used regularly to solve cases. That new detective said it would be useless at that time because they had no official known suspects to compare it to, so it would be better to wait until they did. So again, the case is stagnant. It's going nowhere, and the family has to sit and wait in hopes that somehow a new lead is going to come in. Now, by this point, John had already remarried and started a new family, and so has Stephanie. But John and Stephanie ended up linking up and started another affair. The two of them had even planned to go to Hawaii together. But before they did, John's conscience apparently came over him out of nowhere, and he called detectives to ask if they had any new evidence that would implicate Stephanie in Sherri's murder. Apparently, John had always suspected her of the killing, but was too scared to say anything. And now I'm assuming, Bev, that his fear is because Stephanie was a cop and maybe she could do to him what she did to Sherri. So that prevented him from speaking out, but didn't stop him from sleeping with her.
Yeah, it's like, I'm so fearful of this woman, but I'll sleep with her.
I mean, I guess as long as she's getting it.
It's twisted, isn't it?
She won't kill him, yeah.
Oh, maybe. Maybe he was like, this is a protection for myself. If I sleep with her, she won't kill me.
Yeah, like, I'm safe if we're doing this.
But still, it's like, dude, you have another wife. If you thought she was capable of killing your first wife, like, you're still sleeping with her, you're feeling that same fire that you did in your previous marriage, like, aren't you thinking that the same thing could possibly happen with your current wife?
Yeah.
Like, it's just so irresponsible. I don't understand it. But, I mean, listen, he's reaching out to the cops at this point, so sure, at least that's a step in the right direction. But damn, John.
making weird decisions. That's for darn sure. Now, what is kind of interesting is the timing of all of this, because Stephanie is at the peak of her career. She has an immaculate reputation, and over the years, she's moved up the ranks. She has even received Detective of the Year 2 times. Now, if you think it was hard for detectives to think that Stephanie could have done this back when the murder happened,
it would be even more hard now.
Yeah, she's an amazing detective.
An officer, yeah.
You know?
So it is weird timing that he's calling about Stephanie now when her career has like blossomed. She has this great reputation and everything.
Yeah.
It's like, dang.
Do you not think that that could have been a little bit more impactful if you had spoke up when your wife was murdered?
Yeah, I mean.
Do you think that, John?
I think it probably
You're
could
out to
have.
lunch, man.
You're out to lunch. Eating the delusional sandwiches, are you?
Well, yes.
Better late than never, I guess.
I guess it is. But ultimately, Bev, John speaking out is kind of just swept under the rug, and they're like, yeah, okay. No.
She's an amazing officer. Like, again,
maybe
it's laughable.
Bring us some hard evidence or nothing, okay? Back off, John.
Yeah.
Well, regardless of them not doing anything at the time, eventually a cold case task force was created in 2001 in the LA Police Department, and they were handed Sherri Rasmussen's case along with several others. With just the amount of cases they had to go through, this could have taken forever to solve. But fortunately, all the cases that had DNA or suspects were put at the top of the list.
Yeah, and as we know, there was a DNA profile in this case.
Exactly. Now, it took them a while to make their way to Sherri's case, and in 2003, so 2 years later, they finally send that cotton swab from the bite mark, fingernail samples, and blood for testing. And just because of the sheer volume of all the items being sent for testing, it took another 2 years to get those results back.
Wow, that's a long time to process DNA samples, hey?
How frustrating. Just be like, okay, I'm going to send them in and just let
Waiting
me
2
know when you
years?
get it done.
Oh my God.
I know. I understand it's a whole process.
Oh,
and
I get
want to be
it.
thorough.
But it's frustrating as hell.
2 frickin' years? God. But in January of 2005, they get the results. The fingernails and blood only had Sherri's DNA. But Bev, the cotton swab with saliva on it, came back as an unknown female.
Female. Holy hot diggity dough.
And when it was ran through the database, there were no matches. Unfortunately, the cold case detectives still believed, for some absurd frickin' reason, that this was still a robbery and that it was committed by 2 people. So they thought, okay, one of those 2 people is a woman. So they just kind of changed that MO.
That is so stupid. This
God.
really, really bothers me. It's just a miscarriage of justice, to be quite frank. Like, your burglary theory was confirmed with an extreme bias by another robbery down the street with 2 Hispanic males. Now you have DNA that doesn't match that theory at all, and yet you're still sticking with it. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It does not make sense to me. It really bothers me. You've also been given reason to believe that a female had motive to commit a crime that you just brushed under the rug.
Yeah.
So getting a DNA sample that is female is huge.
Yeah, like, let's look at the people in Sherri's life.
Yeah.
Who hated her?
Yeah.
Was anyone jealous
Who had
of her?
motive? We always say this. Like, who had motive? And Stephanie, girl, you got motive. You're jealous as hell. And I think it's you, Stephanie. I think it's you.
Well, at this point, Bev, you're really the only one.
Yeah, because the detectives sure as hell don't.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing after they get this DNA, but again have quote unquote no suspects, the case goes cold.
Darn tootin' it does. That is, though, until February of 2009. And a brand new detective was given Sherri's case. Now, thank God for this detective, because they read all the details from all the detectives, all the interviews, everything. And they start to believe that this robbery theory...
Bullshit.
Yeah, it was bullshit. So the new detectives comprised a list of all the possible women in Sherri and John's life that could potentially have a reason to harm Sherri, which is what they should have done in the first place.
Agreed.
And they came up with 5 names. 1, Stephanie Lazarus. Number 2, there was a colleague from Sherri's work. And then there was 3 other young women. Now, because of Stephanie's reputation at work, they really doubted her involvement. How could such accredited
prestigious
police
cop
detective
be responsible for such a gruesome murder?
Yeah, so they started looking at the other women first. Now, those 3 unnamed women, they were able to rule them out quite easily with their alibis. Then they looked at Sherri's old coworker, a fellow nurse, and they learned that they had a pretty hostile, intense working relationship, but ultimately she was ruled out through her DNA sample. Now, shocker, this only left Stephanie Lazarus, the last person that they would have expected. And once they realized this might be our woman, they tried to keep it on the down low. They didn't want to taint her reputation until they were able to 100% prove or disprove her involvement. They also believed that if word got back to Stephanie that she was a suspect, she had enough pull in her field to absolutely ruin the investigating detectives' careers. So they secretly started to gather information on Stephanie. What made this even harder was that the detectives worked on the same floor as Stephanie, so they couldn't even use her name in the notes that they made. And what detectives learned in their investigation was the years leading up to the murder and after, Stephanie was in possession of a .38 caliber revolver that was her service weapon. And remember, that is the same type of weapon used to kill Sherri.
Yeah, it was the same caliber.
They also learned that leading up to Sherri's death, she had made several complaints about Stephanie. As we know, she had gone to Sherri's place of work to harass and intimidate her. They also found it interesting that on several occasions, Stephanie had snuck into their gated complex and gotten into Sherri and John's apartment several times. They firmly believed that the robbery motive was a crock. Why would a random burglar steal Sherri and John's marriage certificate and
Amen.
leave all the valuables behind? Thank
Preach.
God someone is seeing it our way, Bev.
No kidding.
God, so frustrating.
Of course, and now they're probably thinking this marriage certificate is a little bit more symbolic for Stephanie in particular, the jealous ex.
Exactly. And just like you said at the beginning, the detectives think that the trick with the blanket to silence the gun would have only been known to someone who was very familiar with weapons, which
Right, yes.
Stephanie was.
That's right, police officer.
Now, something we haven't talked about before was that 2 weeks after the murder, Stephanie had reported that her car had been broken into and items had been stolen, including a sports bag, clothes, videotapes, and a .38 revolver.
What the fudge?
Right? This seems absolutely so suspicious.
Yes.
And it seems like she was trying to get rid of the revolver so that there was nothing to compare to the one at the crime scene. And by reporting a theft, it was an easy way to explain her missing gun.
Right, because if it is in fact like her
Service
weapon, you can't just
throw it
away. Like if you murder someone, you can't just toss it into like a pond somewhere, right? Like there has to be a reasonable explanation as to why it went missing. So what better way than an actual theft?
Yes, all my stuff.
Like your car was broken into. You weren't being irresponsible with your service weapon. No. Someone violated your safe space, i.e. your car, and took it.
And now you need a new one.
Damn, Stephanie.
I mean, it is kind of smart because it's like an easy way to hide it.
Yeah, totally. But it's also probably on record. You know what I mean?
It is on record.
So even though you did want to say like it was missing, you used it as a murder weapon, which something that's not so smart, Miss Stephanie, is that you used your service weapon to murder somebody. Like,
yeah, you're dumb for that.
Kind of dumb for that. But
at least you tried to cover your tracks. Oh.
Exactly. So it just seems weird. It's like, yeah, even though you got rid of it, like the record of it getting stolen is still there. So
the timing
it's just
of
another
it is
piece of evidence that detectives, even though they don't have the weapon, can still use. You know what I mean? As evidence in this investigation.
Exactly. And what really piqued their interest in regards to this situation is that Stephanie went to an unfamiliar police station
to report it missing. Wow.
Because don't you think if you worked at a station as a police officer,
you would just go right to that station and be like, yo,
man, my gun got stolen.
Damn.
And your superior or someone close to you would probably just take care of it really quickly for you.
Yeah, but going somewhere else, it seems like you're hiding something and don't want your
people to know the gun's missing.
Exactly.
They don't want to put like 2 and 2 together, right?
Exactly. Totally, Becky.
I mean, with how the original detectives handle this, it probably wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah, they would have been like, oh, just a random coincidence.
Oh, you lost your gun, no problem.
Yeah, but she didn't know that.
No, she did not.
She was covering her bases.
Now, Bev, because of all this information that's arising, detectives decide this was enough to get DNA samples from Stephanie. So they send undercover detectives because they're still trying to keep it on the
Under wraps,
down low.
on the DL.
And they follow her for a whole week to obtain her DNA. On May 28th, 2009, Stephanie stopped at a cafe with her stepdaughter. And when she left, detectives grabbed the cup that she had used and sent it off for DNA testing. And as we figured, the DNA came back as a match. And even though they had their doubts because of her accomplishments in her career, they were not prepared for the results to match. They were absolutely floored. Now, because it's always hard to arrest a fellow officer or detective, they went to the police chief and they let him in on what was going on.
That one of their own was going to be arrested.
Exactly. The police chief asked them if they could arrest her out of uniform, without her service weapon, and not in front of her peers. Like, keep her dignity a little bit. She had worked with these people for like 20, 30 years.
Right.
So they had to come up with a plan. And they would lure Stephanie to the basement, where there are holding cells and interrogation rooms, under the guise that they had arrested an infamous art thief that Stephanie had investigated and knew a lot about. They would inform her that they knew nothing about this man and they needed her expertise. When the time came to deploy their plan, Stephanie went with them willingly to help. And upon entering the holding cell area in the basement, they all had to relinquish their weapons. When in the interrogation room, they started talking to Stephanie about an ex-boyfriend of hers. So obviously, things were not as Stephanie thought it was going to be. There was no art thief. But
it was just her and the detectives in this interrogation room.
Exactly. And they were just casually talking about this ex-boyfriend of hers. And then the conversation slowly progressed into Sherri Rasmussen's murder. Stephanie told detectives that she barely even remembered that woman. And they found that kind of odd, since she was basically stalking her. So they eventually just laid it all on the table. They told Stephanie that they had matched the DNA found at the crime scene to her. At that point, Stephanie refused to speak with them any further. And as she went to leave, 2 officers were waiting at the end of the holding area to make a formal arrest. Stephanie unequivocally denied her involvement in this case, and knowing the system, Stephanie asked for a lawyer and never spoke to police from that point on. Stephanie was held in a women's prison waiting her trial. The hard part was that they had to rebuild the case from the ground up because the original detectives had just done such a poor job at investigating this murder initially. They had made everything fit this robbery theory, and so they had to break it down and then build it back up. And in 2012, Stephanie Lazarus' trial began. Her defense team argued that there is no way she could have done this. She was never suspected in the original investigation, so why would she be now? This was an absolute witch hunt. They also tried to argue that the DNA testing was inhibited in some way and was not correct. But they never had any proof of that. Within the trial, they had several colleagues of Stephanie that had heard her boast on multiple occasions about her lockpicking skills. She also had several books on lockpicking and had a lockpicking set.
Damn. It's like now we kind of have a little bit more insight into how she actually got into the apartment once she was let into the complex.
Exactly. She picked the lock.
Wow. I did not see that coming.
No. So she had the skill to get in without doing any damage to the key or lock.
Hence the no forced entry.
Exactly. When the evidence was examined by the new detectives and prosecution, they were able to create a story based on the evidence found. And what they came to realize is that Stephanie had waited for John to leave work. She picked the lock, made her way upstairs to Sherri's bedroom, and shot her once. Sherri got up and the battle began, and then moved down into the main level, where Sherri was shot 2 more times. After that, Stephanie had ransacked the house to make it look like a robbery. She found the marriage certificate and then left.
Wow. I do have to say, I was wondering the whole time how and why there was a bite mark, especially now that we know Stephanie was the one who had committed the crime. It is weird to think that there was a bite mark found on Sherri's arm or her wrist. So it kind of like, when I thought of that, initially I was like, oh, is it a sexually motivated crime? Like, did something like that happen, right? Because like, why a bite mark?
Yeah, that's usually when you would see them, right?
Exactly. But then now it kind of makes sense. If there was 2 women that were going toe to toe and having this intense like physical battle, maybe at some point Sherri had gotten the upper hand. And so maybe Stephanie had actually bit her wrist to like
get out of a hold,
or
a
something.
sticky situation.
Yeah. I mean, I know as a woman, if I'm in a fight or a tussle, like a play fight with Craig or something, right? And you're just messing around, what's your first instinct? Like as a girl, if you're being overpowered and you bite.
You bite. Get away.
Yeah.
I want to win.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know many men who bite like that. They're just like, I'll use my brute strength. And I'm like, don't hurt me.
Bite.
Yeah. So it was
kind of
makes more
risk.
sense.
I know when you say that, all I picture is that maybe Sherri had her in a bit of a chokehold or something like that, a neck lock. Is that a thing? I don't know. And then Stephanie bites her to get out of it.
Right. That makes so much sense.
Because it makes so much sense.
Oh my gosh. As soon as I came out, I was like, how did that happen? It makes so much sense.
So much sense, guys.
Oh, man.
But it does. Yeah, it really does. And ultimately, all that evidence that is presented matched the series of events. And on March 8th, 2012, the jury thought so too. And they found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. And 23 years after the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, Stephanie was sentenced to 27 years to life, plus 2 years for using a service weapon in that crime. Because it took so long to rebuild the case against Stephanie, she was credited 1,000 days for time served plus good behavior.
Right, because she was in the women's
correctional center
waiting
the whole time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
After all that, Sherri's parents tried to sue the detectives who originally worked the case because Sherri's father was adamant that they look into Stephanie from day one, but they refused. Unfortunately, this case was denied because of the statute of limitations. So we won't ever know if they were trying to help a fellow officer out, or if they truly didn't believe it, or if they were just that naive. Almost immediately after Stephanie's conviction, she appealed her case, but it got rejected. It won't be until 2039 that Stephanie will be able to apply for early release. In most recent news, November of 2023, Stephanie Lazarus was recommended for parole by the parole committee. This recommendation is then sent to the California Parole Board, and if that is approved, Governor Gavin Newsom has 120 days to grant or deny her parole. So she still has a couple more steps before she'll know. Right. However, if she is granted parole, that could happen July of 2024. So only a couple of months she could be released from prison.
That makes me sick.
It does.
I think that I don't know how often someone for first-degree murder gets out of freaking prison, but I have to assume that it's because of her status as an honorable detective.
Like they're going easy on her.
Yeah, it just seems like that. It's like, oh, we're gonna recommend you for parole because of your, reputation and whatnot. Because I don't know
why else they would do that.
Yeah, that just seems odd, right? Like she murdered someone savagely.
Yeah,
what the fuck?
I agree. It would be so messed up to let her back out into the public.
And what's the saddest thing about all of this, you were telling me earlier, is that after she killed Sherri, she was free for what?
23 years.
23 years before she was even convicted. And then what? She's going to get 12 years in prison?
Nonsense.
If she actually gets parole, I don't think that would be a fair shake to Sherri or her family.
God, no.
They waited longer than that to get justice for their daughter than she would spend in prison if she gets released.
Exactly.
That's crap.
I would be, if I was Sherri's family, I would be so mad with how long I had to fight.
Just to get some detectives with intelligence to look at this case.
And to recognize that Stephanie is a viable suspect.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that she should be investigated for it. It's completely unbelievable. And like you said, it's unjust.
Totally.
They had to wait so long and then just to have her be released early on parole.
No, I hope not. I really hope not.
No, I hope not either.
But we'll have to keep you guys updated.
Exactly. So, Bev, that's all I got for you. This is the case of Sherri Rasmussen. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing.